The Sims was something of a landmark title upon its release at the turn of the millennium. The game was undoubtedly one of the most beautiful isometric games up to that point, with simple construction and creation tools to help you realise your own dreams around decorating a house poorly and having countless affairs with anyone who happened to be passing by your property. But one aspect that The Sims didn't excel at was its artificial intelligence. At first that statement might seem quite unkind. I mean, Sims are able to take care of their basic needs to a certain degree, and if left to their own devices, will make their own choices. They will eat if they're hungry, they will eat if they're not hungry, they will eat if the house is burning down around them. Neat Sims will take showers all the time, while outgoing Sims will dance to music. Outside of that, their decision-making capabilities are, a little questionable. So I decided to see what a Sim could truly do if left to fend for his or herself. This is The Sims Feral Run, and the rules are thusly. Rule 1. Once the run starts, you cannot direct a Sim to do anything. Rule B. You cannot cancel a Sim's decision at any time. This might be the most difficult rule, as years of micromanaging Sims makes me instinctively try and click away any unilateral action they attempt to take. Because, obviously, I know best. Anyway, rule blue. I can try and influence my Sim by buying items and moving them around, but that's it. That's the only interaction I will have with the world of The Sims. It's a simple set of variables that will prove whether or not these little computer people have any level of sentience. But before we could set up our vivarium, we needed a fresh, meaty specimen. Welcome to the Lonesome family, consisting of one household member, George, the last of his kind, a Hell's Angel who works for the military. I gave him neat points in the hopes that he might tidy away the trash once in a while, but I didn't spend any points on niceness because I doubt he will need them. I'm not sure that a Sim can even invite another Sim over in The Sims 1 without being directed to do so. It just seemed like a waste of resources. I might be wrong, but my prediction is that this will be a lonely existence for old Georgie boy here. An isolated alien stranded in an unfamiliar and unwelcoming neighbourhood. Speaking of which, let's get him moved in. We bought the smallest house we could to try and limit George of the suburban jungle's ability to get into too much trouble. I bought a few basics such as a sofa, a TV, a microwave and a new countertop. The cornerstones of any self-respecting bachelor pad. All we needed was a pizza box for a doormat and we'd be good to go. Before we start the run though, we will direct him to do one thing, and that's get a job. Let's give him all the tools he needs to succeed before we cruelly throw him into the bewildering world of freedom and choice. And go! It was almost 24 hours before George needed to go to work, so for one single glorious day, he was a lord of leisure. A world of insatiable hedonism awaits. And boy did it arrive in the form of Hortensia and Mortimer Cultrington, the stars of our last Sims video. What followed was the kind of party only your drug dealer neighbours could have in the daytime, eating copious amounts of tinned meat and depositing rotting garbage across every available inch of the carpet. Considering that George was supposed to be a neat Sim, he'd managed to trash his house worse than Wile E. Coyote's indoor fireworks company. Although his house guests were just as much to blame for the mess, if not more, they were blocking access to doors and trash bins like the antithesis of a Disney Parks employee. The phone rang, but George refused to reach over this chair to answer it. It would take a little feng shui and environmental manipulation to subtly influence George's behaviour. He still didn't answer the phone though, but still, there's always next time. To be fair, a lot of the negative events that occurred on this first day were down to George's guests. If one Sim had wonky AI, then 3 Sims only compounds the problem. George was prevented from using the bathroom because everyone kept walking in, leaving George stuck in the shooing animation for a good few hours. Also, every tin of meat they cast onto the carpet became a festering pile of detritus. The kind that would even make Oscar the Grouch turn his nose up, if he had one. Even after Hortensia had left because apparently can after can of spam hadn't fed her appropriately, Mortimer stayed behind and watched TV into the wee hours, while George took care of basic functions that his guests had prevented him from earlier. Then George decided he had had enough of being a respectful host, and climbed into bed while Mortimer ate yet more canned meat in his bedroom. About time too, as he had to be up for work in about 6 hours. After an uneventful night's sleep, George managed to arouse from his slumber just in time to catch the carpool to work. Not that we could see the car under that inconspicuous camouflage. Still, this is much more promising than anticipated. I expected him to just not bother going to work at all, so this was a slight improvement. George arrived home 6 hours later with an honest day's pay. What followed was copious amounts of chip eating and multiple showers to wash the flies away, and before long, it was bedtime again. However, George decided that 1 AM was a fantastic time to water his flowers. These were flowers that came with the house, I hadn't put these down purposely, but George seemed to like them. He managed to drag himself between the sheets at around 2 AM, and needless to say, when 6 AM and his carpool rolled around, he slept straight through the massive ATV that was leaning on the horn outside his house for a whole hour. George awoke to find that he had missed his second day at work, and he even missed a phone call from his drill sergeant, undoubtedly demanding press-ups for this transgression. Nevertheless, upon waking, it was time for George to break his fast with a spot of lunch. He ambled over to the kitchen and managed to cause the cooker to spontaneously combust. This was because he had no points in his cooking skill, and in fact had no skills in anything at all. As the flames grew wilder and hungrier for soft furnishings, I lamented my oversight in not buying a fire alarm for the kitchen. A fire alarm would automatically summon a firefighter, somehow, who would extinguish the flames for George. Without that luxury, I was also unable to direct George to call the fire department or tackle the blaze himself. Due to the rules of the challenge. Buy mode is also locked out during the fire, so there was nothing I could do except sit and watch as the fire crept closer and closer to George. Like a man too busy panicking to take action, George was too busy panicking about the fire to take any evasive action. In a few seconds, he was reduced to a pile of carbon on his own kitchen floor. R.I.P. in pieces, George. You managed to live for a whole 2 days before dying in the most avoidable of circumstances. Despite this setback, I wasn't deterred in my experiment. I was determined to carry on. Perhaps I could even correct some of the mistakes I made last time. So, George Lonesome, the aforementioned last of his kind, now, miraculously, has a son named George Lonesome II. A previously extinct prehistoric species that had been resurrected through the miracle of genetic science, like in that award-winning movie, Kung Fu Panda. Fortunately, we managed to get George Jr. the exact same job his father had vacated through his untimely death, so we could just go back to normal and act as if nothing ever happened. I bought a few more luxuries, such as an extra table to store things to try and keep some of the flammable garbage off the floor. I bought a fire alarm for obvious reasons. I bought a bookcase in the hopes that George too would take it upon himself to study cooking. No such luck. This new George was far more accident-prone than his father, averaging at least 2 blazing infernos a day. Still, at least the overstretched and under-budgeted resources of the nearby fire department were on hand at every waking moment of the day to bail George Jr. out every single time. You'd think after the 11th time they'd have put him in a home or something, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's see how George II's first day went. Well, excluding the fires, everything went fairly smoothly. This George was much better at keeping his house tidier, probably because he had more counter space to prepare food, and thus didn't have to resort to tins that inexplicably turned into islands of litter. Bella Goff arrived to welcome him to the neighbourhood, who George greeted, then promptly neglected on the porch in favour of watching TV. The pair did eventually get on quite well, until George too started eating snack after snack after snack, and failed to make any food for his guest. Hungry, Bella left in a thick malaise, leaving George to his lonesome namesake. Turning on the television for company, George watched horror films into the wee hours. It would be a tall order to get him to work on time, and, predictably, he failed to do so. Despite missing his first day, he still wasn't fired somehow, so to make sure it didn't happen again, I tried buying him an alarm clock. Speeding things along through the incessant fires that plagued his existence, George met Betty and Bob Newby, and barely spoke to them at all before going to bed after a fairly uneventful day. The alarm clock did its job and woke George up in time for work. An instant success. One thing I did forget about the alarm clock in The Sims 1 is that it does need to be set on a daily basis in order for it to work. Unable to command George to do so, I watched in horror as the work-shy sim missed the next workday, and the next. 4 days in, and he'd managed to attend once. The drill sergeant was so angry he shouted himself inside out. George was fired. Fired! Which was kind of triggering considering what was going on in the kitchen. So Georgie Porgy spent his long and lonesome days reading books and doing other, very indoor things. Days went by without him interacting with any other human beings. The social bar was soon redder than a sunburnt pimple on Alex Jones's face. George was sobbing his arse off about his loneliness. He had a phone, but his limited AI made him unable to make calls, and nobody ever called him. The only social interaction he ever had was being saved by the firefighter on a 5-a-day basis, and was probably just the firefighter saying, "Oh God, not you again!" Oh great. A perfect end to a perfect day. A ne'er-do-well in my neighbourhood, committing terrible fashion crimes. The scallywag, looking like a French Lone Ranger, triggered the burglar alarm I had the foresight to set up beforehand, and the police were on the scene before George even woke up and realised anything was wrong. But wait a minute. Hold the phone and horses simultaneously. We got part of the cost of the TV back, plus an extra £1,000? Now, I have no idea what causes burglars to trigger in The Sims 1. I don't know if it's truly random, or if you tend to get more if you live on your own, or your house looks easy to rob. All I know is this particular house seemed to be an absolute honeypot for robbers. We were getting hit every 3 or 4 days, meaning we were making far more money than any stupid job could ever pay us. Who needs work when you could just live in a bad neighbourhood and live off the insurance? Why bounty hunt when the bounties can come to you? We could set up a thirst trap for burglars. By this point, the taxman had realised that there were now untaxed earnings in the household, and had been sending bill after bill to the house. Now, George was perfectly capable of going to the mailbox and retrieving said bills, putting them on a surface, but then seemed unable to actually pay them himself. They'd been gathering for a few days now, and were getting redder and angrier with each passing cycle. I was starting to think that this could be our undoing. We had successfully managed to insulate ourselves from fire and crime, but how could we defend ourselves against the repo men? It would take an intervention to resolve the situation, one which I wasn't willing to give. And so, the repo men came and took our burglar alarm, the one item that was generating revenue for us. We just bought another one as soon as he'd left. It was still profitable for us to let this happen this way. And so, I was surprised to learn that you can allow a sim to look after themselves without your guiding influence. Provided the setup is correct, you can prevent them from burning to death, and you can make enough money to replace the goods that the repo men take by allowing yourself to get robbed regularly. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but in my mind this actually makes it almost impossible to fail in The Sims. Unless you go looking for failure. Sometimes failure's fun. Except kidney failure. But I think we have decisively proved that, with the right setup, a sim can look after themselves, in a fashion, and I think that's something that we can all learn from. Thank you, friends and enemies, for watching to the end of the video. I've been using a HD mod for The Sims, and I have a link to it down in the description below if you'd like to play this old classic on modern widescreen monitors. We have some more Sims stuff coming soon, along with Transport Tycoon, and a few other non-Sims games. But until then, please watch whatever I upload next. Or just keep watching this video on repeat. Doesn't matter to me. Goodbye!